A traditional teaching dossier consists of course outlines, lecture notes, and lab notes, but my new teaching material doesn't lend itself to this format. In order to try to better convey the new anatomy teaching material that I've developed, I'm instead creating this video dossier tour. This video teaching dossier will describe 3 unique defining changes to the delivery of anatomy within the new MD program pre-clerkship, which is known as the Foundations curriculum. The first is the integration of anatomy content within the new curriculum with other facets of the student's learning. Secondly, there's the anatomy e-modules, which I describe as a one-stop shop for all your anatomy needs. And thirdly, there's a component that's a seamless integration of technology, interaction, and high-quality content. These are the new live online review sessions. So before the Foundations curriculum, so up until the last academic year, 2015-16, anatomy was taught in the pre-clerkship using 57 hours of lecture and about 110 hours of lab. The way it worked and the way anatomy within a medical curriculum has traditionally worked, it involved lectures, labs, and supporting lectures were lecture notes and textbooks that students could use to support their learning. For labs, students had lab notes that guided them through the tasks they were to do in the lab. They'd have a dissector, which is a textbook that gives step-by-step instructions about how to dissect a certain portion of the body. And then there'd be atlases that they'd use to give them some video references for what they were trying to accomplish. And of course, the lecture informed the lab learning, and the lab learning informed the lecture learning. And these days, Wikipedia informs everything. Then the students would take the information that they derived from all these different sources, and they would assess their knowledge using a bell ringer. But the challenge that I was given with the new curriculum starting in September of 2016 was that these 57 hours of lecture would be eliminated. And the students would learn with no lecture hours, but still with the 110 hours roughly of time spent in the labs. So my approach was this. With the lectures disappearing, the lab became the central focus for the students' learning. And this is where all of their interaction with each other and with their teachers would take place. They would still be referred to textbooks and atlases for support, but I would create e-modules which would guide their learning both outside the lab and in the lab. And then they would have their knowledge assessed using a bell ringer, as they traditionally were. But this time, they didn't have to contend with multiple sources of information, but this one main source of information, which is the e-module. So I call it a one-stop shop e-modules. And I'll describe here how they use the e-module, how the students use the e-module. They'll learn the facts from the e-module that they would have learned in lecture, but they'll do so at their own pace. Medical students are a heterogeneous bunch, and they come in, some of them with a great background in anatomy, others with none. Now, lectures take place at the same pace regardless of the individual student's background, but e-modules, because the student interacts with them on their own, they can go through them at whatever pace suits their needs. They use the e-module to prepare for lab so that they can learn the foundational information that's needed in order to carry out the tasks in the lab and learn from the materials that they have access to there. Then once they're in the lab, they use this same e-module to direct their studies. So they'll have, the e-module has step-by-step descriptions of exactly what they're supposed to do, whether they're dissecting or working with other specimens. And then after the lab, when they're preparing for a test, they can review their anatomy using the e-module as well. So in this way, I feel it's a one-stop shop for all the students' needs. The new anatomy curriculum content is completely different than it previously was. It's integrated within the weekly systemic approach that's used in other facets of the curriculum, such as in their lectures, in their case-based learning sessions, and in their clinical skills sessions. In the first year, the anatomy is divided into 4 units, each of which consists of 3 labs. And the topic of each unit builds on the one before. The students have just finished their Unit 3 module on the thorax. And in order to describe how the e-modules work within the anatomy units, I'm going to focus on the next slide on Unit 3, Lab 7, 8, and 9, which were on the thorax. So here, what you're seeing are the 3 labs in Unit 3, Lab 7, Lab 8, and Lab 9. And as you can see, each 6-hour lab consists of 4 stations, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a field trip. Now in each lab, you've got 32 students, and they're divided into 4 groups of 8. And so 8 students will cycle through the stations in turn, and students have 90 minutes at each station. So one group of students will spend 90 minutes on the first station, and then they'll move on to the second stations for the second 90 minutes, and then the third, and then the fourth. Each station might involve dissection, it might involve the study of a prosection, it might involve the study of bones or of a model. If they finish a station early, they can't move on to the next station because there's other students working there. So what students do is they go on what I call a field trip. A field trip is a visit to Grant's Museum of Anatomy, where they study selected specimens that are outlined in the e-module. Each station includes spotter questions. So in the labs, I have the TAs quiz students orally as they finish each station. This idea comes from the experience of clerks and residents who describe being quizzed on the spot by staff in the clinical setting, such as in the surgical suite or on the wards. Quizzing in the anatomy labs therefore prepares students early on for these experiences that will come later in their training. In the anatomy lab, every student in a group is asked one question at the end of each station. The answer is either right or wrong, and this determines their group mark. Their group mark carries a small weight in their overall grade, just enough so that the students take it seriously. The purpose of all this is to encourage preparation to identify knowledge gaps for the students, which can then be addressed in the moment. It encourages learning in the moment as opposed to cramming later on, right before the test. It also encourages peer teaching and a sense of teamwork. Because the quizzes come at the end of the station, students are motivated to help each other to understand the concepts as they work through the material. If one student gets their question wrong, the group suffers. This creates a collaborative approach to learning that encourages students to think of the success of the group, which translates in their future practice to everyday situations where they work in teams. So without further ado, I'm going to give you a tour of a gross anatomy e-module. This is the entry slide for Unit 3, the anatomy of the thorax or the anatomy of the cardiorespiratory system. And students will begin here when they're starting their studies. They'll enter into the module and they'll find interactive bubbles that might contain a joke or more usually contain some valuable information. Now students will start with a lab selection. As I told you earlier, each unit consists of 3 labs. Unit 3 consisted of labs 7, 8, and 9. I'm going to show you or demonstrate the power of the e-module using lab 7 and using station 2. I'll remind you that each lab consists of 4 stations, and the students rotate through these 4 stations, spending 90 minutes at each station, and any extra time is spent in Grant's Museum on a field trip. So in Lab 7.2, the students study the internal structures of the heart, and when they enter this portion of the e-module, they can see the specimens they're going to be working on, and they're also going to see the essential anatomy bookmarks that I've prepared for them that go along with the slides in this portion of the module. Each station starts with a series of objectives, so the students know what they're expected to learn by the end of the station. I'm going to choose a slide to use to illustrate for you many of the interactive features of the e-module. And on this slide, you can see, for instance, some hyperlinked information bubbles that might give the student the derivation of a word or the definition of a word. Sometimes the hyperlink might give them some extra information about a structure that they're studying. The illustrations on the slide can be popped out, made larger, so that the students can see the labels more clearly. There's an essential anatomy bookmark that's been built to align with this particular slide. Now, Essential Anatomy is an app that the students might purchase if they choose to, but what I've done with it is I've created these portions of these tailored models that the student can interact with, can study, can move around on their own. They can zoom out, they can zoom in, they can explore the names of the different structures that are on the model that I've created for them. And as I say, these are all created tailor-made to align with many of the slides in the e-module. There are also dissection videos that I can illustrate for you that show the student how they should be working with the cadaveric material in the lab.
So here's where I need a GoPro, but I don't have one, so we're going to see how this works out. You're looking at the heart from its anterior aspect, and you can see that I've opened up this door into the atrium, and you can appreciate that there's an opening from the inferior vena cava into the atrium, and there's an opening from the superior vena cava into the atrium here.
They can play the... On another slide, I can show you a different type of a hyperlink that I've built into some of the slides. So for instance, on this slide, you can see that these arrow buttons are placed with some of the text in the slide. And when the students click on these arrow buttons, they're brought to another slide that gives a little extra information or an extra illustration of the information that they've just read. Moving down to the bottom of the module, you can see that I've integrated some imaging into the e-module. So here we're looking at a radiograph of the chest, and I've hidden the labels here so that the students can test their ability to recognize basic anatomy using imaging. They can see the answers after they've tested themselves, and they can hide the answers and look at it a little more. Each station ends with a dynamic quiz, and the students can test their knowledge. They can work their way through the questions. I'm going to choose this question as an example because it's a very beautiful picture of a right ventricle with beautiful papillary muscles and septomarginal trabeculae. The question is to identify the chamber of the heart. And so the student can type in their answer, and let's say that they type in the wrong answer. Let's say they say left atrium, and they enter that answer. They'll be told where to go within the module to learn the correct answer. So I can go now to slide 17 and learn that I was actually looking at the right ventricle. So now that you've got a taste of what the e-modules look like, I'd like to move on to the third innovation that has arisen in the new curriculum. And it arose because of some feedback that I received from the students a few months into the school year. And what I found them telling me was that although the e-module and labs, they complemented each other, many students said that they missed the real-time interaction with the professor that traditionally takes place in the lecture theater. So I was faced with the challenge that there was no available time slots within the schedule in which I could have some anatomy classroom time. Now, I looked around, couldn't find any pre-existing software that allowed me to take the classroom experience online. So I tackled the problem by combining multiple independent technology resources along with an online video conferencing platform and a pen and tablet writing capability. This way I was able to host live online review sessions that focused on select content. Best of all, I hold these sessions at a time that's mutually agreed upon with the students. So when it's convenient for us all, that's when we hold these sessions. The students send me their questions for the review sessions ahead of time, and that allows me to prepare special slides that address their needs. I record these sessions for the students who are unable to attend in real time, and right now I'll play a clip from one of these recordings for you. So that's all well and good, and now we have a sympathetic innervation of body wall. But what about sympathetic innervation of the heart? So here's the heart. Add the heart into the picture. There we go. So now we want to get sympathetic innervation to the heart. So let's talk about how that happens. So again, we have a sympathetic preganglionic neuron in the lateral horn, and the axon goes out through the ventral root, and it goes into the sympathetic chain, and there it finds the cell body of the sympathetic postganglionic neuron. And then what happens is that the sympathetic postganglionic neuron, its target is the heart. So it's not going to go back to the ventral ramus or the dorsal ramus. What it does is it forms a sympathetic cardiac nerve. So I can add another nerve onto my picture. There, I'm putting a little sleeve onto that. So you see there's a nerve that's emerging from the sympathetic chain ganglion, and it's a visceral sympathetic nerve. It's going to the heart. In addition to sending me questions ahead of time for these online sessions, students can also send their questions in real time during the session. And they do this by text chat within the online room space. I'm able to address their questions in real time and clarify the material during the sessions this way, similar to the way I would in a classroom lecture. So to conclude, the format of the new pre-clerkship curriculum presented me with the challenge of innovating and revolutionizing the delivery of the anatomy material in a way that integrates with the students' weekly systems focus in all other courses within the MD program. There are 3 defining changes that I've introduced. Firstly, I've created new, wholly integrated anatomy material from scratch. In the absence of any lecture time, I've created a one-stop shop e-module companion that the students use in the lab, before the lab, and after the lab to learn their anatomy. And lastly, I found an innovative strategy to provide the students direct real-time interaction with me during live online review sessions. Now, finally, if you've lasted this long, thank you for watching my video dossier tour, or VDT, as we can call it from now on.